Welcome to Dark Celtic History.
On this podcast, we will tell 6 tales of demons and devils. Pack with the Devil in the Scottish Highlands. The lands of ascent were granted to Torquil MacLeod of Lewis during the reign of David II, although his ancestors had traditionally held the area from the mid-13th century. These lands of ascent had already acquired a dark and evil reputation. Yet MacLeod did not let that faze him, and he carried on with his plans for the land. Now his second son, Norman, was given ascent as his portion of the grant, and he got to work quickly, being young and eager to make a name for himself. And even though plenty of other worldly events happened over the years, he kept that secret quiet as well. The castle was built in 2 phases, with a simple rectangular hall built by Angus More III in the late 14th or early 15th century. Now, this was 4 stories high with the upper floors of timber. However, during the 16th century, Donald Ban IX added a stair tower. It is said that during the castle's construction, the laird entered into a pact with the devil. The devil offered to help the laird in exchange for his soul. The laird, being a canny Scot, was not about to pass up on an opportunity for free labor, and besides, he dearly yearned immortality. Negotiations were in an impasse when the lord's daughter, Emer, appeared on the scene. The devil was smitten right away by the lovely lady's kindness and her beauty. He quickly, without thinking, seized his opportunity. He agreed to build the castle on the condition that he could marry the laird's daughter. Well, the deal was secured, and the castle was built, and the wedding took place. Alas, it was a time when women of gentle birth were pawns in marriage deals and arranged weddings. The poor lass had no idea who she had been wed to until after the marriage ceremony. To her horror, she discovered her husband's true identity. Dismayed by this revelation, she flung herself out of the tower window onto the loch below, where she was crushed upon the rocks and drowned. Now it is said that she wanders the ruins, weeping and wailing, a foreboding to all those that the devil is about in these parts. The Devil at Vane Castle. The ruin of the Z-plan Vane Castle dates from the 16th century. It was built by the Lindsays. Now there is a legend of the devil associated with this castle. At Vane Castle, it is said that Satan himself roams the castle, and there were those amongst the reformers who might have thought that Cardinal Beaton was the devil incarnate too. In The History and Traditions of the Land of Lindsey, the book written in 1882, it states, "The doings of Satan at this place are proverbial. In the umbragaceous ravine through which the Norrin tumbles its pellucid waters, it's the very place which imagination would picture as his abode. And here, in all conceivable phases, he reigned of old, and perhaps still reigns today. For according to provincial rhyme, this locality was his favorite place of residence." And then it has a little poem that goes along with this. "There's the brownie o' Bacharm, and the ghost of Bradenden. But of the places in the parish, the devil burns up the Vane." Now, almost opposite the Vane Castle, there is a spot of ground called the Devil's House, where the notorious personage from which the place is named has made some wonderful manifestations of his presence, and even later times than our grandfathers, and from this place, which is a small hollow in the middle of the muir. Large humps of earth had been thrown to a great distance without any visible cause. A legend of treasure refers to an arched cellar or vault that forms the ground floor of the east wing and is the only roofed part of the building. Now, underneath there is said to be a deep dungeon into which the family, before taking their final departure, threw all their treasure of money and valuables into. This chamber has often been sought for, and only one person is believed to have found it, but when about to descend in search of the valuables, he was forcibly thrust from the entrance by an uncouth monster in the shape of a horned ox. Now, that monster, after throwing him, departed in a blaze of fire through a big hole in the wall, and before the terrified treasure seeker could recover himself, the chasm which he had wrought so hard to discover was closed forever to his view.
The Devil's Bridge. The Welsh landscape is so beautiful that it attracts gawping visitors from all corners of the globe, including, apparently, the underworld. Legend has it that in the 11th century, Satan himself visited Ceredigion after hearing from so many returning demons that Wales is so beautiful. So he came to see what all the fuss was about. While he was there, he met a woman whose cow had become stranded across a river. He offered to build her a bridge in exchange for the soul of the first living thing that crossed it, assuming it would be her. After mulling it over, she reluctantly agreed. Suddenly, the waters of the river burst forth, parted, and stones bubbled up from the muck of the exposed river bottom. The stones grew and grew until they had reached the level of each bank of the river. The devil then let fire fly from his fingertips, and he heated the stones until they were smoothed to form the surface of the bridge from one side to the other. Then he let loose the waters to cool and cut through the stone. The water cut through the bridge, carving a perfect arch in the stone and allowing the river to flow once again. He turned to her and bowed and gestured for her to try his new creation. Once she saw the bridge was built, she could see what the devil was trying to do. She knew she had to act quickly. So she reached into her bag, pulled out a loaf of bread, and she threw the bread across the bridge. Now it came to stop just on the other side. The devil looked at her in amazement, and with a smirk on his face he told her that, well, bread is far from a living thing, and that would not count. Just then, a beast burst forth from the trees behind her. Her dutiful dog, yet hungry dog, ran straight across that bridge after an easy meal. When her dog had crossed and was enjoying his meal, she proceeded to cross the bridge herself, and when she had reached the other side, she turned and looked back towards the devil standing astonished on the other side. With no other recourse, the devil bowed to her cleverness, because it is rare when he is fooled. And that's a Welsh legend.
Nvi Orany's malevolent creature. Now, in Celtic nations, there are a number of mythological creatures that share the land and waters with humankind. Some are benign, others avoid humans at all costs. And it's probably the most sensible of all, because of all the creatures of the world, humans appear to cause the most harm and trouble. Now, other entities in folklore can only be seen or heard at times of impending tragedy, but there are other creatures who appear strongly in traditional beliefs, and there is those that strike fear in the heart of all who encounter them. One such creature exists around the seas of the Orkney Islands, just north of Scotland, known by the name Nvi, which is derived from the Orcadian word, I won't even try to pronounce it, but the meaning devil of the sea. Now, accounts vary in regard to the appearance of the Nvi, a hybrid of a man and horse-like creature with horrifically strong Viking influences. It appears to be a fusion of Celtic mythology and a dark Norse legend. The Nvi is described as having a head and torso in the shape of a man, but with a huge head and a large mouth protruding out like that of a pig. The creature had one single red eye that burned like fire, It had a man's torso attached to a horse's back, but with long arms that could reach the ground. To add to the horror of his appearance, the creature is without hair or skin, a raw body where his black blood can be seen coursing through his veins and every pulsating muscle taut and ready to pounce. Its intention towards all humans who crossed his path is completely malevolent, bordering on downright evil. Another otherworldly being in the Orcadian folklore, known as the Mither of the Sea, is said to have the power to keep the Nucalevi at bay and under the sea and off the land during the spring, summer, and early autumn. However, in the winter, the Mither of the Sea must return to the other world and renew her powers. This is when the creature can emerge from the depths and walk the land of the Orkney Islands, and of course wreak havoc and chaos among any who cross his path. The reason the Mither of the Sea does this in winter is because of the plentiful rains of the fresh water. You see, he, Nucalevi, has a fear of rain. It can curtail the power of the Nucalevi, for he gains his power from the salt of the sea. The plentiful supply of rain in Orkney during the winter and his inability to touch the fresh water is the key to escape this horrific monster. Just reach a freshwater loch or river. All right. Nevertheless, though, for the people of the Orkney, this is a feared and loathsome creature. His breath is said to be like a poison that causes harm to livestock and crops to fail. He is also considered to be responsible for epidemics and drought. The people of Orkney have experienced the Nucalevi's wrath. You see, in the Orkney, from the early 18th until the early 19th century, they burned seaweed to produce kelp. They realized all too quick it was infuriating to the Nucalevi. The Nucalevi hated the smell of the smoke so bad that it drove him into an uncontrolled rage. In revenge, he inflicted all the horses on the island with a deadly disease. The Nucalevi doesn't require much of an excuse to cause harm to the people and animals of Orkney. He is indeed an evil and malevolent creature, and you would be wise to avoid him. The Priest and the Corgan. In the rich Celtic mythology tales of Brittany, the Corgans form a group of female entities who are associated with rivers and wells. Sometimes they are described as fairy-like creatures with beautiful golden hair. They are seen in some tales as changelings who can alter their shape. They can lure men with their beauty and have the power to make them fall in love with them. If a man falls in love with a Corgan, well, they kill him. Corgans are sometimes described as druidesses who fought against the Christian conversion of their supernatural domain. They are also associated with Halloween, which has its origins in the old Celtic New Year on the 31st of October. On this night, some say they can be seen waiting for victims near the ancient megalithic dolmens that are found in abundance in Brittany. And this is where our story begins. Irish bishops and clergy were in exile in the mid-17th century France due to Cromwell's reign of terror across their native Ireland. A young priest who was tormented by the thoughts of what his parishioners must be enduring sought refuge near an ancient dolmen, a rock formation near the church he had been sent to. And he cried out to God to protect the people he loved so much, for he had heard stories of the atrocities Cromwell had been inflicting. While on his knees, ceaselessly praying for all those involved, a beautiful young lady with golden brown hair appeared from around the corner of the large stones, frightening the young priest by her sudden appearance. She bowed and apologized for her intrusions on his prayers, but he just laughed and invited her to sit down and talk. Secretly within himself, he liked the company of a beautiful woman. His vows forbid such a relationship. But talking and letting the idea float around in his head, while still a sin, would not get him excommunicated. The two of them talked for hours. He imparted his woes upon her, and she listened intently, a skill he wished he had during confession sometimes. The two of them talked, laughed, and exchanged awkward glances until he noticed the light slipping away from the evening sky, and the grumbles coming from his stomach. Now, he lamented that he had missed dinner at the church and would probably have to wait until morning. She quickly offered to give him simple bread and broth if he would just safely escort her home, as it was getting late, and if she came home with a priest, her father would not think she was out doing the devil's bidding. He agreed. They walked along a woodland path and veered off into the thick woods. He was told her home was just up ahead several times before he stopped and asked her what was going on. Now, he should have just turned and ran, but as she turned, she began to remove her tunic. Her bare breast shimmered in the moonlight, and as the priest stared in disbelief, she turned into a ferocious beast and devoured him. So it was at that moment, when he didn't run, he didn't admonish her, he didn't object at all, that she knew she had gotten him to fall in love with her, and therefore he was hers, eternal. Now, many legends surround the House of Bins and its most notorious resident, General Tam Dalyell. The table upon which the devil and the Tam supposedly played cards is from one of the many tales of his fascinating life. The House of the Bins is the ancestral home of the Dalyell family. One of its most infamous inhabitants, of course, was Thomas Dalyell. He lived from 1615 to 1685. He was general and commander-in-chief of the king's forces in Scotland. Dalyell first entered military service as a teenager and served in France before serving in Ulster, where he reached the rank of colonel. Now, he was imprisoned in the Tower of London after the Battle of Worcester in 1651, but managed to escape. He later fled to Russia, where he served Tsar Alex I, father of Peter the Great, in the Russo-Polish War, and in other conflicts against the Turks and the Tartars. Credited with bringing the thumbscrew, a torture device, over to Britain. His time in the Russian military also earned him the nickname the Muscovite Devil. It was after the suppression of the Pentland Rising in Rullian Green, at which over 1,200 captured Covenanters were, imprisoned in Greyfriars Kirkyard, that he gained his more common epithet, Bloody Tam. Alright. Now, it was after Dalyell's death in 1685 that the legends surrounding Bloody Tam really began to develop. They include accounts of the general's cavalry boots marching around the house on their own at night, and of a ghostly rider on a white stallion galloping along the road towards the Bins. The most infamous tale concerns a marble-top table in the entrance hall. Dalyell allegedly used this table when he played cards with the devil. During one night, during a game, in order to finally beat his fiendish opponent, Dalyell placed a mirror behind the table so that he could read the devil's cards. Angered by the cheating, Old Nick threw the table at the general, which narrowly missed him and ended up in a pond outside. The table was assumed missing, and its exact whereabouts were lost to time. However, 2 centuries later, during a drought in the summer of 1878, the table was rediscovered at the bottom of the dried-up Sergeant's Pond and restored to its rightful place inside the house. An interesting note about this object, it's beyond the legend, is crafted out of white marble. The top is carved with a floral design where semi-precious or precious stones were once inlaid. Now, the stones are now missing, but we can imagine how luxurious it must have looked. It is attributed to be a piece of Mughal furniture brought back to Scotland from India by Dalyell during his travels abroad. Now, one distinct feature of this table that could be proof of the legend of Dalyell and the devil is something that wouldn't come off during its restoration, no matter how hard they tried. And it's described as a satanic hoof mark seared into the table. Indeed, the back of the corner of the table has a distinctive semicircular stain on it, and this is supposed to be the mark of the devil. Well, I'll let you decide. I'll show you the picture. If you're already a subscriber to the Ye Olde Scot YouTube channel and enjoy the variety of interesting videos and podcasts that we produce weekly, then you should join us on the Ye Olde Scot Facebook group. Not only do you get all the great videos you already enjoy, but so much more. Come and connect with your Celtic community here on Ye Olde Scot Facebook group.